Ron, it's a pleasure to have you here.
You
joined, so we will have time to talk about Thimbleweed Park. You joined LucasArts more than 30 years ago, so I would like to talk a bit about that as well.
It's a long time ago.
So can you take us back? How did you get the job at LucasArts, LucasFilm Games back then?
Yeah, getting the job was actually a lot of random luck. I was in college at the time, and I'd built this program called Graphics Basic, which was this little basic extension language for the Commodore 64. And I'd sold it, the publishing rights to this company in California. And after we signed that deal, they said, "Hey, do you want a job?" So I thought, okay, well, that sounds fine. So I quit college, and I loaded up my car, and I drove to California, because I was living in Oregon at the time. And I went to work for them, and maybe 6 months after I started, the company went bankrupt. So that was my first introduction to the games business, was my company going bankrupt. And so I packed up my car, and I moved back to Oregon, and I was going to enroll back in college, and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, literally, I was in my parents' kitchen, and I was about to head up to the university to have lunch with a friend, and it's like I walked out the door and the phone rang, and I'm like, oh, I really don't want to go back and answer that. And so I started to head more out, and the phone kept ringing, and I finally went, fine, I'll answer it. And I just went back in and answered the phone. It was somebody from LucasFilm, because they were looking for a Commodore 64 programmer, which was what I had done at the previous company, and I guess they had heard about me from someone that worked there. And I thought, wow, LucasFilm. And I had no idea they made games. To me, Lucasfilm was Star Wars, and Indiana Jones, and I had no idea they made games. And so it's like, wow, Lucasfilm. So I packed up my car and I drove back to California. And I hadn't even got the job interview, right? I just moved back to California because I was getting that job. There was no way I was not getting that job. So I got the job.
So the gaming branch of Lucasfilm was very new, while the Lucasfilm name was very big, of course. And can you take us back? How was working there in the early days? Because I think you had this fancy Skywalker Ranch where you were working at.
When I first started, we were in this kind of industrial complex called Kerner. And it's where Industrial Light and Magic was. So, because they had a lot of warehouses, because they were constantly blowing stuff up all the time. So, we were kind of down with them, and we were there for, I guess, about 1.5 years, maybe 2 years. I can't quite remember. But when I started, there were 7 people in the LucasFilm Games group. It was a very, very, very small group of people, but it was just an amazingly creative group of people. It's like, I don't think in my life I had ever been around smarter people, than those people. And that was kind of this weird experience. And it was just, it was absolutely wonderful to be there. And, I was 11 years old when Star Wars came out, right? And that was like the perfect age to be a Star Wars fan. And so, to me, Lucasfilm was just this like amazing thing. And George Lucas was like my hero and all this stuff. And then to be working there, was just mind-boggling.
I think you are one of the very few game developers who do both the coding bit, but also the creative bit. How did this come about? Did they ask you to do both, or did you bring that, and that was your advantage?
Well, I think in the early days of the game business, I think you really had to do both, right? People were building games completely on their own, and so you did art and you did programming and you did design and you did all this stuff in those early days. And I was hired at Lucasfilm to be a programmer, to do Commodore 64 work, and it was there that I met Gary Winnick, and he was an artist. He was actually the only artist in the Lucasfilm Games group, and he and I just really hit it off, and we had a really great friendship, and we just started working on this weird idea we had for this mansion and this weird family that lives in it, and this group of kids that go in, and all this stuff, which later became Maniac Mansion. And I think we just kind of started working on this. I mean, nobody gave us permission. We just kind of started working on it. And you know, I think it was, in those early days of Lucasfilm, games weren't really greenlit. There was no process. I think people just started working on them, and then when nobody told them not to, it kind of just became a game at that point. That's kind of the way Maniac Mansion really developed.
And it's still considered a seminal game for the genre, Maniac Mansion. So
yeah, it's kind of the first, true point-and-click adventure game.
Yeah. So how did that come about? Did you look at other games like the Sierra games and think about how do you improve on that? Or?
Yeah, I looked at, Gary and I had started working on Maniac Mansion, and we had a lot of story ideas, but we had no game, right? We had no idea what this game was going to be. We just knew there was this weird family, and we knew it was a weird mansion, and we had a bunch of weird stuff that was going to happen, but we had no game. And it was during a Christmas break, I went and I visited my aunt and uncle, and my cousin was playing King's Quest I. And that's the first time I'd ever seen King's Quest. And I remember just watching him the entire vacation, sitting there playing this game called King's Quest, and it just kind of dawned on me. It's, oh, well, this is what Maniac Mansion needs to be. It needs to be an adventure game. And I'd played text adventures and stuff, but I never really thought about Maniac Mansion as an adventure game, because I think, Gary and I had always figured this was going to be a very visual game, and to me, adventure games were text adventures. But seeing King's Quest it's like a hit in the head. I'm like, oh, okay, adventure games can have graphics, but I just hated the parser. I hated typing, and it's probably because I can't spell at all, and so it was just getting rid of the parser. It was, and as I played King Quest, I realized, there's only about 10 verbs it really understands, right? Everything else is just like synonyms. And so it's like I just kind of boiled it down to those 10 things, and those became the verbs, that showed up in Maniac Mansion.
There are rumors that Steven Spielberg took some interest in what you were doing at LucasFilm Games.
Yeah. Spielberg was a huge gamer. And then, back then he just loved games, and whenever he would, come and visit George up at the ranch, he always had to come by and see what we were doing, and he was a great person, because he wasn't the kind of person that would come to the room and kind of sit there and look at your demo and go, oh, that's kind of nice. He wanted to play it. Right? He was just in there trying to do it. So I think my claim to fame is I got in a fight with Steven Spielberg over a mouse.
So how does it feel to be considered a pioneer of the video gaming industry and still one of the very big names in it? Is it more an advantage that, for example, it's easier to do crowdfunding nowadays, or would you rather have some more time undercover to develop your games?
Well, it certainly is an advantage in that, things like doing crowdfunding for like Thimbleweed Park, that having a name in the business helps you a lot. Like, I don't know that we would have gotten the game funded, had we not, had the name that we had. But it can also be a little bit of a detriment. It's like I'm so known for point-and-click games that people just assume that's all I want to do with my life is just make point-and-click games, and so there's a little bit of that kind of comes with it.
So the Monkey Island games are, I think, the games which are most famous for being associated with your name. But after Monkey Island 2, you left LucasArts to found Humongous Entertainment. And that was a time where the LucasArts games were very popular and very famous. Why did you decide to try something new and found Humongous Entertainment and target children now as opposed to?
Well, the LucasFilm Games, the Sierra games were always a lot more popular in the US. And that was very frustrating to us. It's like, we put out Monkey Island and it got good review scores, and, King's Quest V sold 10 times the number of copies. And so that was always kind of frustrating. And, so people do ask, it's like, well, why did you leave Lucasfilm? It's like you had this like amazing franchise. Monkey Island was this monster hit and you left. And it's like, well, it really wasn't, right? At the time, Monkey Island was a good game, and I was really proud of it. And
probably my German perspective on it.
yeah, and it was, it was completely the opposite in Europe, right? Like Europe, the LucasFilm games were hugely popular, and the Sierra games weren't quite as popular. But I didn't really have a lot of visibility into what was going on, in Europe with that stuff. It's like I knew they were translated, but we had no internet back then, so you didn't get that immediate feedback from people that, oh, this is really getting popular over here. And so I just, it's just not something that really occurred to me. So I don't feel like I left this like hugely successful, franchise to go do Humongous Entertainment. But Humongous Entertainment, really started from watching a 5-year-old play Monkey Island. And, he was playing the game, and he couldn't really read. There was no voice in the game back then, and he couldn't read. So he had no idea what was going on in the story at all. And, he kind of figured out what the verbs were, eventually. But he was just having so much fun walking around the world, opening and closing doors. And walking through the doors and, talking to people even though he had no idea what was being said, and occasionally triggering some weird animation where you step on a plank and a bird flies away, and he just loved that. And he would spend hours playing this game. And that's when, I kind of thought about, well, maybe I should just make adventure games for kids, and not kind of dumbed down storybooks, which, it kind of started to come out at that time, but real adventure games with actual puzzles and characters and all those things, but just simplify stuff a little bit. In a normal adventure game, you might solve a puzzle and there might be like 4 different puzzles that chain together you have to do to solve the thing. But in the Humongous Entertainment games, it's like it was only 2 chains, right? All puzzles were just kind of 2 steps to solve them. So it was just a little more simplified, but they were real adventure games. And so that's kind of why I decided to do Humongous Entertainment.
And that time after you left LucasArts, more Monkey Island games kept coming out. Curse of Monkey Island, Escape from Monkey Island. How was it to see other people carry on with what you started with Monkey Island, and probably, for those who don't know, Monkey Island 2 left on a very controversial note. I loved it.
Oh, good.
But
some
people didn't, yeah. And then to see that you can't continue from that point, but others do. How was that?
I think it's always strange when you create something and then you see, other people take it on. And I think it's true of any creative thing. It's like when you create it and you kind of push it out to the world, right? I guess it's a little bit like having a kid that you have kind of raised and then you shove it out into the world and you cross your fingers and kind of hope that everything's okay. And I think anything creative is like that. You kind of send it out there and the fans react to it, and the fans take it places, and in this case, people made sequels from the games, and I quite liked Monkey Island 3. I thought it was a very good game. It's not the game I would have made. They did stuff I would not have done. I never would have had Guybrush marry Elaine. I never would have done that. But so they did stuff like that. But I think it's a good game. I'm kind of happy to have that game as a part of the series.
I wonder, as a game developer, do you also play a lot of games, or is it when you spend the whole day making it that you want to do something else? I remember last time I met you, you were very much into World of Warcraft, but that's probably a special case.
Right.
So do you also play, for example, adventure games?
I do play adventure games, but I play them, I think I play them for like work reasons. It's like I want to understand what people are doing, but I don't play them for enjoyment because I'm too close to them. It's like I can't play an adventure game without deconstructing their puzzles, and kind of going, oh, well, I would have done that. I would have done a little hint over here. I would have done this. And it kind of, sucks all the enjoyment away from that kind of stuff. So I don't, I do play a lot of games. I like RPGs, I did play way too much World of Warcraft when it came out. I don't do it anymore. But I kind of enjoy RPGs, so I think that's kind of the game that I play for fun, is that kind of genre, like Diablo style RPGs.
We're jumping a bit in time. In 2012, 2012, your former colleague Tim Schafer basically invented crowdfunding for games. Not really, but he was hugely successful by collecting more than $3 million for Double Fine Adventure. And at that point, you were actually fine on the cave. So how was the atmosphere then? Because crowdfunding was quite a new thing and no one really expected that amount of money to come in.
Yeah, I think it was very surprising. I mean, I don't think, I wasn't really involved in that project, so I don't really kind of know the behind the scenes kind of working of it, but you know, just as a company, I think there was this kind of feeling, like I think they asked for like 400 or 350 or something like that initially, and I think there was this feeling that they were going to barely get that, you know, and it was going to be a thing where just at the end they'd be out there just begging people for money. So, you know, when it kind of, you know, went through the roof like that, I think it was a surprise and a shock, you know, to everybody with that.
Yeah, and it was not for shooter or for some popular genre, because classic adventure games by then were quite a niche.
Not for a popular genre.
I mean,
no, I know what you mean. Sadly, I know what you mean.
I don't think there are a lot of classic adventure games in the last 10 years that have that kind of budget.
Well, I think things like, you know, Kickstarter and any crowdfunding, I think those platforms work really well with nostalgia, you know, because, you know, anything nostalgic, and I think Thimbleweed Park is an excellent example of that, you know, nostalgia kind of hits us at this, you know, emotional level. And, you know, if you can kind of tap into that, and I think that's where Kickstarter really excels, is like when you tap into someone's emotions in some way. Like if you want to build a really successful Kickstarter, the thing that I always tell people when they ask me is like, don't try to sell people your game. It's like, sell them your dream, right? So it's all about, this is my dream to make this game, not here's this game I want to make and I have 4 enemies and I have 16, you know, things of armor. It's like, well, that's a box with a bullet point list, right? Sell them your dream about what you want to do. And that kind of taps into their emotions, which means it's a lot easier for them to go and then kind of, you know, do funding. And I think nostalgia just easily taps into that same emotion. And that's why, you know, you've seen, you know, games and other things on Kickstarter do really well because of the nostalgia component.
2 years later, you started your own Kickstarter project, Thimbleweed Park. And before we talk about that, I think we can show a trailer with scenes from the game.
My name is Dolores Edmond, and I am here to warn you about Thimbleweed Park. My uncle built the town and the world-famous pillow factory using his brains, sweat, arrogance, and ego. Thimbleweed Park was the center of the social scene. Parties, movie stars, and the rich and famous all drawn to its flickering light of promise and vision of the future. Then the factory fell on hard times. Everything slipped away, and the town descended into the shell of decay and pity before you. Leaving the pillow factory to me was my uncle's only plan for redemption. He knew I could save it, and him, from ruin in the eyes of history. But I don't want to save it. Something terrifying is happening. Something that itches and festers and grows with each scratch. Something I know my uncle started, and his death is making stronger. My name is Dolores Edmond. I am one of only 5 people that can prevent what our careless ambition and reckless dreams have brought upon us.
Hey, it's Ransom the Clown here. And I want to tell you about this game called Thimbleweed Park. If you think this is a game about figuring out who killed the stiff out by the bridge, you're wrong. That rotting corpse is the least of your problems in a town like this. The town is run by a rich, narcissistic egomaniac who's obsessed with artificial intelligence built from vacuum tubes. Yeah, I'm not kidding. Before I was cursed by this old lady, I was rich, famous, and at the top of my game, doing sellout shows every night. Now I'm reduced to breaking into a burnt-out pillow factory to steal back the plans for my comeback doll. Oh yeah, and these morons are also gonna help. Man, Thimbleweed Park. Get to hell.
That does not look like most games in 2017 look like. You already said a bit about this, but what made you decide to go for this retro style? I mean, it looks like not exactly like 1992, but very close. What was the decision process here?
Well, it started with, before the Kickstarter, Gary Winnick and I, who did Maniac Mansion together. We were just having lunch, and we were talking about the old LucasFilm games like Maniac Mansion and Loom and Monkey Island and Indiana Jones, all those games. And those games, to us, they had this certain charm to them. And as much as I like kind of current adventure games, like I really enjoy Firewatch and Gone Home and Kentucky Route Zero and all those things, but they don't have the same charm that those games had. And we were kind of talking about, what is that charm? What is it that those games have that a lot of games don't? And we just didn't know. And we kind of had the idea of like, well, you know what? Let's just build one again. Let's build one like we built those games back then, and see if we can figure out what that charm was to those games. And so that really started started the Kickstarter, because that was really kind of the only way to fund a weird experiment like that was through Kickstarter. So that's really what started it, which is kind of why you see the very 8-bit pixel graphics and stuff, because it was like, well, is that a part of the charm? Did a lot of the charm of those games come from the graphics? This kind of simplified, almost kind of icon-based, graphics. Was that really part of it? And then the other thing we wanted to do, and you don't really see it from the trailers, but you really see it if you actually play the game, is our goal was to build a game that wasn't, like a game back then, but it was like you remembered a game back then. So there's a lot of stuff going on. It's like we have real-time lights in our scenes that kind of cast off of characters as they walk under things, and so but that's all the stuff that your mind like filled in for you when you were playing those games. And it's like, well, we're just going to do it now because we have the technology and all the smooth scrolling, and there's 11 different layers of parallax that can move as the screen scrolls, and we just didn't have that stuff back then. So it's really about, this game is really about recreating that memory, more than it was kind of authentically recreating that stuff. Speaking of technology, I think you still are involved in really coding the game, and while that might have been the thing to do in '87, nowadays there's almost no one who actually codes something and does the creative process. So do you want to have all the control over the game, or why do you do that? I think I just love programming. It's like the engine for this game. I built this whole 2D adventure game engine from the ground up for this game. It's like I didn't use Unity, I didn't use any stuff. I just built the whole thing. And there are lots of existing engines around. Yeah, there are. I mean, there's lots of really good ones, but I think a little bit of it is that control thing. It's like I've worked in other engines before, and as a programmer, I get very frustrated because it's like, well, I want it to do this, and the engine won't do that. And especially if the engine is kind of a black box, like Unity can be, that you really can't get in and start mucking with the code. That stuff really just frustrated me, and I knew from the beginning that we wanted to do a lot of different things with this game graphically, because we wanted it to be a game like you remember those old games. So I didn't want to use one of the adventure game systems that was currently out on the market, because they tend to more authentically recreate, what you could do from that era, and we really wanted to really push beyond that with stuff. And I felt like just creating, my own engine for that was probably the best way to do that. And I just love to program, right? It's what I do for fun, so it wasn't a hassle, to do that at all.
So on the day you're making a game, and in the evening to relax,
I program. Yeah. I do. I have websites and servers and all this stuff that I'm just constantly mucking with. So.
Yep. You mentioned you started this with Gary Winnick, who was a former LucasArts colleague. You also worked with other colleagues like Tim Schafer after you left LucasArts. Is there something like a class of '92 thing going on where you meet up with former LucasArts colleagues? Because it was such a dense place of talent which still has big names in the gaming industry.
Yeah, with Thimbleweed Park, it's like I am working with Gary Winnick again, but I'm also working with David Fox. And David Fox, when Gary and I built Maniac Mansion, there were 3 people that built that game. The whole team was 3 people big, and it was me and Gary and David Fox. And David Fox did game programming, and I built the engine and did game programming. Gary did art, and so. But David's working on this. He's doing game programming on this as well, and. All of the art, the background art that you see, was done by Mark Ferrari, and Mark Ferrari was the background artist on the original Monkey Island. So it is, it is kind of this little bit of a reunion, team of people getting together for it. But I think I have stayed in touch with people like Dave Grossman. Is a good friend of mine, and he worked on Monkey Island, and I think we were a small enough group of people that I think we just kind of forged a lot of friendships, in that period.
So now that the project is almost finished, I think it's being released very soon.
Soon.
So already a date?
Soon.
Soon is the date, okay.
It's on the 17th of soon.
Looking back, the decision to go to Kickstarter, I've talked to a couple of game developers, and some are very happy with the decision to go to Kickstarter, some are not so happy. What's your perspective?
I'm really happy that we went to Kickstarter. I think, one of the things that we really wanted to do with the Kickstarter was to make sure that we were very open about our development. And it wasn't just about, sending monthly Kickstarter updates and, hey, this is where we are. But we really wanted to really talk about the development of the game. And, we started a blog and a podcast that we do, and we talk about a lot of stuff. It's like I post code on there, and I talk about coding and how I'm coding stuff up, and we talk about our dialogue system and how that works, and we talk about testing, and we talk about all these different components, and we talk about budget. It's like I published a little spreadsheet, which is our budget for the game, and it kind of walked people through, well, this is how I budget a game, this is how I account for all the people and the time and all these kinds of things. So I think we've been really, really open with people. And I think a lot of Kickstarter projects that I've seen where backers kind of turn on the developers, and I think that mostly comes from just lack of communication. I think if you communicate with people and you explain to them what's going on, you can really kind of hold them in a way, and that's what we've really tried to do, and I think it's been a wonderful process. These books that you see on this little screenshot here, I wanted to have all these books for the library in the mansion that Dolores lives in, and I thought, well, it would be really fun if rather than just these graphic images you can't do anything with, if you actually had little books that were like 2 pages long, and so every time you clicked on a book, it would pop it open, and there'd be 2 pages, and that'd be really fun. But we didn't have the time to do that, and I figured, well, I'm gonna go to the blog, and I'm gonna ask the backers and the readers of the blog if they were interested in maybe just writing a couple of pages for the book. And I figured, well, maybe we'll get like 150 of these books, and it'll be really good for the library. And we got over 1,000 submissions. And so if you go into the library in Dolores's mansion, there are 1,050 books in the library that you can read 2 pages of every single book. And, you know, some of them...
All with voiceover?
Not with voiceover. Not with voiceover. No, you can just read them. You know, and some of them are just wonderful. I mean, some of them, people just spent a lot of time just really thinking about their 2 pages, you know, and this one group of friends got together and they did a whole choose your own adventure, where it's like you read one book and it says, you know, if you want to do this, go read this book. If you want to do this, go read this book, and you have to go find that book, and it's just, I mean, it's wonderful, right? And so I think you know, the backers and the readers of the blog, I think they've really contributed to this game, you know, with things like the book. And we have a voicemail system where if you back the game at more than $50, you got your name in the Thimbleweed Park phone book. And if you go to these numbers and you actually dial the number into the phone in the game, you get a voicemail message that the backer had recorded. You know, and there are 4,000 names in the phone book, 900 of which are Germans. But so there's 4,000 names in this phone book, and you go and you dial up the names, and you get these just charming little voicemail messages that backers have recorded and, you know, are playing in the game. So I think that's just kind of a way that I think that, you know, the people who've backed and supported the game is just have made the game so much better, and it's just so much richer with their involvement in it.
It's kind of a recurring theme. There was a library in Monkey Island 2. There was one in Indiana
Fat
Jones
Island, yeah.
at the Last Crusade. Now this, what's going to happen in your next game?
Yeah, I don't know what I'm going to do. How do I top that? How do you top 1,000 books in a library to read? But there, you know, we brought playtesters in to play the game, and you know, sometimes they hit that library and they're like, oh my God, I am going to spend hours in this library reading these books. So some people just love.
But there's not one of them which has vital information.
There are 2 books in the library that contain vital information to solving a puzzle. But fortunately, there are lots of clues and stuff to tell you exactly where those books are. So we don't expect you to go through and read 1,000 books looking for the one book.
We'll soon open up the questions for the floor. So if you have questions, please go to the microphone in the middle. That's easier for the cameras. I will have one more question and then we will open up. So what's going on with the toilet paper?
Oh, yeah, the toilet paper. I posted a picture of the bathroom in Thimbleweed Park of the Quickie Pal, and you know, like any, you know, public restroom, and you had some toilet paper there, but the toilet paper like curved under the roll rather than curving over the roll. And I posted a picture on Twitter, and I wasn't thinking about the toilet paper. I just posted a picture of the bathroom, so I thought the bathroom was really interesting, and it just kind of created this like storm of, and I mean literally hundreds of tweets coming at me telling me the toilet paper was wrong. That the toilet paper is supposed to curve over the roll, not under the roll, and it just became this thing, you know, and so you know, it's kind of interesting because, you know, Mark Ferrari, when he did the bathroom, he did the toilet paper hanging under, and I remember he delivered that piece of art to us, and I think David was the first one that got it, and you know, David kind of slacked me, and he's like, hey, the toilet paper's wrong. and I kind of went and I looked at it and I went, oh yeah, it is, and then we both kind of said, no one will notice. and then we just kind of went on with stuff, and then that whole Twitter thing happened, and it was yeah, it kind of got to the point where, you know, we were kind of talking about it on Slack, and we was like, wow, we should put an option. We should put an option for the toilet paper. So when you're playing the game, if you go to the options menu and you know, snake down into the video menu and all this stuff, there's a little checkbox, toilet paper under. You just click it, and it just switches the toilet paper. And we thought that would be more interesting than having an in-game way to do it. You know, it was such a weird thing. It's like, no, it's got to just be a menu option. Right? It's the way it needs to be.
Okay, I think we have a question on the floor.
Hello, my name is Marina. Huge fan. Your games were also popular in Latin America. They taught me a lot of things as a child. For example, the notion of transferable skills with the sword challenge in Monkey Island.
Right.
So kudos for that. And also, thank you so much for making the Swordmaster a woman. Because in an industry that is largely dominated by males, that was a very empowering message. So I wanted to ask you about the character creation process and how do you profile each of the characters in terms of psychology and motivations, etc.
I don't think there's a scientific process to that. It's like, you know, when I'm creating characters for a game, it's just whatever I think is interesting, you know. And so the characters just kind of get created, and I don't really know necessarily where those sparks, you know, come from. You know, sometimes they're driven very heavily by the story. You know, obviously, you know, the two agents in this are kind of driven by that. But, you know, for the two agents that are in Thimbleweed Park, it's like I didn't want to have that typical or stereotypical kind of agent, you know, buddy system, you know, partners going out to and do a crime. I wanted to just do something a little bit different with them. And, you know, what we came up with is that the two agents both kind of stumble on the body separately. It's like they're not partners, and there's a huge amount of distrust between them because they don't really know each other, and I mean for good reason, because neither of them are there to actually investigate the body, right? They're there for these whole other reasons in town, and it just felt more interesting to me to have these two agents that were kind of at odds with each other. You know, and in terms of Carla, the Swordmaster in Monkey Island, she's based on a person that worked in tech support at LucasFilm named Carla, and you know, Carla looks very much like the close-ups of the Swordmaster, and I don't exactly remember. I think it was probably just some weird thing where we were having a conversation with her one day, and you know, she really loved the sword fighting or something, and we went, "You're the Swordmaster," you know. So it's kind of probably how it happened. I don't remember exactly.
Another question?
I think I have two, but I will choose one. Like lately, video games tend not to be only about video games. Like the monetization part of video games with in-app purchases, ads, or this kind of thing are very deep entangled with gameplay. And like, how do you feel about that? Like, how do you feel it impacts the experience? How do you feel the future of monetization for games should be or will be?
I'm not a big fan of current monetization of like mobile games and stuff, because I feel like a lot of that stuff, you know, designers, or it's probably not even the designers, it's probably more of the marketing and the, you know, those departments, that they're really kind of feeding off people's almost gambling impulses, right? That it isn't about building a really great game that you want to give a lot of money to, right? I'm fine with that, right? It's like if I build a really great game that is just really fun and you enjoy it, you know, that's really good. I mean, God knows I spent thousands of dollars on World of Warcraft, right? But I don't think that it was, you know, because they had kind of tapped into this weird gambling part of my brain. They just built a really good game, and I was happy to give them a bunch of money over the years to play that. Where I think a lot of the monetization now, and especially with, you know, this kind of live A/B testing that goes on, it's like they can just narrow something down to just that right little button click that you're going to do, and I don't feel like a lot of that is game design. I mean, there are exceptions, right? There are some really good mobile games that do in-app purchases that, you know, are really good games, but it just feels like a lot of it is more this science of pulling money out of you rather than the, you know, the art of game design.
So starting programming on the Commodore was a very, very different experience probably than programming today. Yeah. Were there any like features or game systems that you really wanted to put in Maniac Mansion or Monkey Island that you just couldn't because there wasn't enough memory or your processing power wasn't enough? And then, you know, from that, were there any of those, kind of long percolating ideas that you did put in Thimbleweed Park?
Yeah, there's two things really come to mind. One are the arcade games. Like if you go into Maniac Mansion, there's a bunch of arcade games that are up on the 3rd floor, I think, but none of them are playable, right? And that was the kind of thing where we kind of thought, oh, we should make all these games playable, but we didn't have the disk space, right? I mean, Maniac Mansion on the Commodore 64 was 2 sides of a single density floppy disk, which was 320K, all right? Not meg, K, right? That was the entire game. And so we couldn't really, get all of the arcade games working. And for Thimbleweed Park, we have an arcade in the town that you can go into, and there's all these arcade games. And we thought, excellent, we're finally going to get all of these games working. But we've totally run out of time. So none of the arcade games are playable. But through the miracle of like patching, which is really simple to do these days, as soon as the game ships, we're going to jump in and get all those arcades working, and then there'll be like a patch that will get them all functioning. So that's one example. The other example that comes to mind, if you play Maniac Mansion, there are several ladders in the game, and when people use the ladders, they just walk up the ladders, right? There's no climbing animation, right? They just do their normal walk, and we just kind of vertically move them up the screen when they do it, because we just didn't have the space, right, to do an actual climbing animation. We were so incredibly tight with the memory that we could have, the number of things that we could have loaded, as well as what was on disk. We just couldn't do climbing animations, and that was something that just bugged the hell out of me at the time. But with Thimbleweed Park, as you can see, we have ladders in Thimbleweed Park, and we have climbing animation. So when characters get on ladders, they actually go into climbing animations, and that was very cathartic, for me to see climbing animations. So those are kind of two things that come to mind.
Thank you.
There was a computer in Day of the Tentacle a couple of years later after Maniac Mansion, where you could play Maniac Mansion.
Yeah, you could play it, yeah. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that one doesn't have a predecessor that you could play.
So yeah, going back to, you were talking about the charm of some of these older games. Something I've sort of thought about as well. I think some of it maybe comes from the fact that the limitations forced you to be a bit more abstract, I think, in a lot of those games, which gave more wiggle room then for sort of weirder things to happen that just don't work when things are more realistic, and also engage the person playing with the game a bit more, because you've got to imagine some of it yourself if you're filling in the gap. So what do you think about?
I think that's very right. I think that's one of the things that we've discovered, through the process of making Thimbleweed Park, is I do think that the 8-bit graphics kind of allow for a lot more imagination. And Gary, doing the art and stuff, it's like, he was saying that, that isn't, an agent. That's an icon of an agent, right? And because of that, you can kind of extrapolate in your mind. And we very carefully, it's like we never show close-ups of any of the characters. We never have scenes where you cut to a close-up of this highly rendered, painted face of anybody. We always keep them in that same kind of view for that exact reason, that I think it just allows your imagination, to go a lot more. And I think the other thing that we've kind of discovered in terms of kind of the charm of those games is kind of what I've come to call this sense of place. That I think that, Maniac Mansion, it was this weird house, and you got to know the house, and the house was almost became the main character of Maniac Mansion, and you explored the house, and you got to understand where all the rooms were, and you built this little mental map of the house, and it had this really strong sense of place, and the characters that did it, and I think a lot of the LucasFilm adventures had that. They always created really interesting environments, and we spent a lot of time trying to make those environments feel like real places. They're just weird things work. Like you turn on the water in the kitchen and it would actually run, and you'd open up the refrigerator and there was stuff in there. And that's something we tried to do with Thimbleweed Park, is we tried to make it this real place and give it a sense of place. And there's over 50 characters in Thimbleweed Park, and 47 of them are all voice acted, and they all kind of inhabit their place in the town, and they run the stores and they do this stuff, and it's all a part of that kind of sense of place. So I think the 8-bit graphics and then that sense of place are these. I think they're two major components to the charm of those games.
So these agents, I guess, could be Mulder and Scully, or could not be Mulder and Scully.
Well, I don't think they're Mulder and Scully because they don't have the personalities at all. I mean, Mulder and Scully were partners and they were in it together and all this stuff. Where Agent Ray and Reyes hate each other, and they're clearly not in this together. And there are times when they're trying to thwart each other and all this stuff. So I mean, they're definitely not Mulder and Scully.
Okay.
Hello, sorry. First of all, your games are amazing. Thanks. And we play them in Brazil. So one thing I noticed different, you talk about Sierra games a little, is that they were very punishing. So you die there. You die and then you have to start all over again. And for LucasArts games, it's funnier because, you can keep going. And of course, sometimes you get blocked. But did you think about this back then? Because Nintendo games, for example, you die and you have to restart over. And sometimes it's kind of boring. And how does it impact your game designing decisions?
Yeah, we thought about that a lot. If you play the original Maniac Mansion, there were lots of places that you die, and there were lots of puzzles where just doing the wrong thing would completely screw you over. It's like there was this can of Pepsi that you find, which was actually product placement, I might add. There was this can of Pepsi in the game, and you needed to give it to the man-eating plant, so the man-eating plant would start burping. So then you could climb up the man-eating plant. But you could also take the can of Pepsi and you could pour it down the drain. And if you did that, there was no way to win the game because you didn't have the can of Pepsi anymore. And we never told you that. So you would pour the can of Pepsi down the drain, or you do something else with the can of Pepsi, and there was no clue at all that you had just completely screwed your game up. And I think some of that comes from just being naive, that it really was the first adventure game that we had done, and Maniac Mansion is just filled with that kind of stuff. And when I went and I did right before I did Monkey Island, I wrote this article for it was called the Journal of Computer Game Design, really highfalutin sounding name, but it was this little magazine that you could do stuff, and I submitted this article called Why Adventure Games Suck. And it was 15 rules that I had formulated for designing adventure games. And if you go to my site, grumpygamer.com, it's actually up there and you can read it. And one of the rules that I come up with is no death. And I kind of felt like if you die in an adventure game, you're basically pulled out of the fantasy. Because you've spent this time, living in this pirate world, and suddenly you die, and you're pulled out of the whole fantasy, and you have to pull up this menu of save games, and you have to go, find your last save game and load it, and that just felt wrong to me. It felt to me that you should be able to start the game and sit down in your big comfy chair and just lose yourself for hours and just never get pulled out of the fantasy. And so that was really kind of the main reason that I just said was, there's just no death in adventure games. So it's kind of that reason.
Thanks for doing that.
Sure. Thank you.
Any more questions? I have one more, and then I think we finished. VR. Last year, it was the big year of VR. So that is quite a two-dimensional game. But what's your perspective on this? Do you think it's the next big thing in gaming, or do you think it's just a trend?
I don't know that I'm the right person to ask, because VR makes me motion sick. It's like I'm one of those people that I put on a VR helmet, and within a few minutes I'm just completely sick from it. So I don't do a lot of VR. So I'm the first person to kind of say I don't know that I understand VR because I don't really do it with that kind of stuff. It does kind of occur to me, like I think VR is absolutely the future. There's no question about that. I kind of think that future is 25 or 30 years from now, not right now. And I think that's just a technology problem. I think as soon as you're strapping something big and heavy on your face, I think you've just lost an entire segment of the world, the second that has to happen. And then I think until we kind of overcome that, right, until VR is a part of my contact lenses, that it's always going to kind of be a little bit of a niche thing. But since I don't VR, I'm not the best person to answer that question.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ron Gilbert.